While Drake's discography is undoubtedly mesmerizing at its best, recent years have not been so kind on the Canadian. His latest album, For All the Dogs, has been a resounding critical and social failure, with critic reviews calling it bloated and tiresome, whilst audience ratings have given the album a 2.8 out of 5. 10 years ago, it would have been unthinkable to see a Drake album be received so poorly, and now, it's a rarity to see one received well universally. So here we are with Drake's 14th project in 14 years, and For All the Dogs kind of feels like a tired sigh, signaling the approach of middle-aged exhaustion. Drake being on the brink of 37 isn't the issue. It's more about his towering presence in the music world and the so-so creative results that can happen when you operate on such a massive scale. In 2023, Drake shares more in common with a seasoned CEO than he does with his younger peers like Lil Yachty. Having a global, multi-generational, multi-genre fanbase doesn't always provide the ideal breeding ground for artistic daring. It's tough to stay innovative and nimble when your competition isn't Meek Mill, but rather yourself. It's even harder to represent youth culture when you've become a part of the establishment. For the past 5 years or so, Drake's albums have been struggling to reach the level of true art or even basic coherence. Ever since the days of blog rap, he's been trying to break free of the constraints of traditional album formats and the diminishing returns that come with being an album artist in the 21st century. Interestingly, his most critically acclaimed and beloved works are often labeled as mixtapes or playlists, such as So Far Gone, If You're Reading This, It's Too Late, and More Life. Even his standout albums like Take Care and Nothing Was the Same are remembered as much for the brilliant tracks left off the final track list as the ones that made it. Since Views in 2016, the all-important focus has shifted towards streaming numbers on platforms like Spotify and Apple Music, making the quest for artistically satisfying albums somewhat vague. So, when we dive into For All the Dogs, the only thing holding it together is Drake himself. There's no coherent story, concept, or consistent musical theme running through it. Despite Drake's promise that For All the Dogs would be a return to the old Drake, the album feels like it was created by an artist who somewhat lost touch with what made him special in the first place. Despite Lil Yachty's executive producer role, with his 5 production credits, the album comes across as shapeless and somewhat anonymous. Yachty, at 26, should represent the demographic raised on Drake's vision of Instagram-infused self-absorption, but instead, he seems to enable the artist's meandering direction. Back in the day, Drake was the crazy music student, a bit of a lovable overachiever, eager to share his musical discoveries. He'd get fixated on different music scenes, like Memphis, the UK, or Jamaica, and it wasn't enough to just sample DJ Screw briefly. He'd build whole songs around his fascination with a particular region's sound and how it influenced his own music. There was a real depth and lineage to his R&B tracks, like the influence of Alia's conversational and diary-like vocal style on songs like Marvin's Room. When he used a sample, it had to be more than just recognizable. He'd twist it into something new and textured. Even if his albums lacked a bit in substance, they made up for it with the style and vibe. But when you look at For All the Dogs, things are a bit off to say the least. It's like the chemistry is an afterthought. Back in his prime, Drake had this symbiotic relationship with his main collaborators like Lil Wayne, Party Next Door, Rick Ross, and Rihanna. But on For All the Dogs, most of the features seem to be there either as guaranteed streaming hits, like J. Cole, SZA, and Bad Bunny, or as attempts to connect with a younger audience, like Tizo Touchdown, Yeet, and Sexy Red. It feels like the art has been sacrificed for the numbers. Take, for instance, the track First Person Shooter. Cole comes in all guns blazing, sounding like he's in a rap battle from the 90s, while Drake lists every woman in his contacts like some cartoonish villain. And it's not just this. Even the 2 SZA songs on the album suffer from a similar disconnect. Despite both being lyrical powerhouses and mood setters, their collaboration feels like 2 parallel tracks rather than a joint effort. If there's any theme that ties For All the Dogs together, it's a pervasive bitterness. Now, Drake has always had his moments of bitterness, but this time it goes to some pretty unpleasant extremes, spoiling otherwise decent tracks. His targets haven't changed much, and it's pretty evident he's still nursing grudges. On Fear of Heights, he takes the whole He-Man, woman haters thing to an outright misogynistic level, with many fans suspecting it's aimed at Rihanna. He starts the song by questioning why people still think he's hung up on some unnamed ex, and then proceeds to spew crass lines with the subtlety of a barn owl. "Sex was average with you," he raps. "I had way badder girls than you." He wraps it up by teasing the Rihanna figure about her man taking her to Antigua. Then there's Calling for You, where Drake raps over a moody beat reminiscent of his older work. The Friday sample in the track is classic Drake material, a throwback to his So Far Gone and Take Care days. But then, midway through the song, there's this baffling 90-second skit about a woman complaining about flying economy and jerk chicken, which is probably a convoluted shot at Pusha T, referencing his American Airlines tweets. In other words, it's just not Drake. As a fan, it would be hard not to become disillusioned by stuff like that. And then there's his constant need for respect and loyalty, which has caused more commotion and headlines than his music itself, especially in his recent squabbles with various media figures in 2023. It's like the drama outside the recording studio has overshadowed the music. In particular, one recent episode involving Joe Budden. Last Saturday, clips of Joe Budden tearing into For All the Dogs started making the rounds, and they were pretty brutal.
On even some of the shit that was on, what was that, Scorpion? More Life? What was that? One of them shits. This is like Yachty rapping. This is like he rapping for the children. And that's yo, dog, I had to look up how old this nigga was when I finished listening to the album. Mm-hmm. You are 36. Your birthday is in 20 days. I Googled that too. You will be 37 years old. Get the fuck away from some of these younger niggas and stop fucking these 25-year-olds. I'm listening to the album.
You mentioned it.
Why are you still fucking the 25-year-olds? You're a 37-year-old billionaire.
Unsurprisingly, Drake couldn't resist taking the bait in this mostly one-sided, nearly decade-long feud. Because what better way to show your content with the reception of your new album than by writing a 248-word Instagram paragraph addressing Joe Budden? In Drake's extensive response, he called Budden the poster child of frustration and surrender and advised fellow artists not to let these opinions affect your mindset. It might have carried more weight if Drake didn't imply that Esperanza Spalding, a jazz musician who bested him for the 2011 Best New Artist Grammy, was irrelevant because she didn't reach his commercial success. Drake has little reason to change or mature. Very few millionaires do. No amount of so-so reviews or Budden's taunts can slow his roll. If current projections are on the mark, For All the Dogs will sell less than Views or Scorpion, but still more than anything else in its league. It snagged the #1 spot and spawned a bunch of top 10 hits. The streams will be off the charts by anyone's standards except Drake's. Besides, a Drake version of 444 isn't a great idea in the grand scheme of things. And on a smaller scale, there's enough evidence to suggest that not many folks want that kind of content. The last time he took a creative risk with something like last year's record. Honestly, never mind, the reception was lukewarm at best and openly hostile at worst. Following late-era Drake is a bit exhausting for fans. He wants the respect reserved for the legends, but he also expects the kind of leniency that struggling underdogs get. The old Drake can't make a comeback, even if he wanted to, not when sticking to the same formula. Is this profitable? Whether you're a die-hard member of the Drake fan club or just an observer, it's hard to ignore the incredible rise of the kid from Toronto. He went from being a teen actor on Degrassi to becoming a big, self-referential hip-hop icon. Everything that defines Drake, the mysterious, emo self-mockery, the avoidance of media, the carefully crafted image, should have set him up for a fall. But instead, Aubrey Drake Graham still very much has a stranglehold on pop culture. Fellow streaming giants and previous collaborators like Bad Bunny, The Weeknd, and even Jack Harlow all point to Drake as a major influence on their careers. Getting a nod from Drake is like a ticket to stardom. Artists like Joria Smith, Yebba, Party Next Door, The City Girls, and many more have seen their careers flourish thanks to their association with the rapper. While numbers can't fully capture the extent of Drake's success, they do help put it all into perspective. He's consistently one of the most streamed artists on Spotify, crossing the 50 billion streams mark in 2021. He's sold over 170 million albums, a rare feat in today's music landscape. He's won 5 Grammy Awards and boasts more Billboard Hot 100 #1 singles than any other rapper. He's even tied with Whitney Houston for the 7th spot in the overall #1 hits ranking. His Summer 16 tour with Future back in 2016 broke records as the highest-grossing hip-hop tour ever, bringing in a staggering $84.3 million, outperforming tours by big names like Jay-Z and Kanye West. Drake, an artist who's often linked with youth culture, the parties, the mistakes, the complexities, and the love tangled up in it all, is now in his mid-30s. And it raises the question, where does he go from here? In his own unique way, Drake has managed to break free from the traditional boundaries of rap and create a genre and persona entirely his own. He's made sadness, romance, and success all synonymous with his name, and it's clear that the world isn't tired of it just yet.